Does hot sauce need to be refrigerated? Well, we're going to discuss that here today, and we're going to be breaking down the science by storing different types of hot sauce, and we're finally going to put this to rest. Episode 195 starts now. What's going on, Swear Nation? So glad to have everyone here. Welcome on back to another amazing episode of the Swear Word. I'm Brandon Swear, and today we're going to be answering one of the most common questions that I get from new and old sauce makers, collectors, and everyday lovers. And honestly, it's one of those questions that sounds incredibly simple, but once you start looking into it and you start seeing the online debates, you'll see that things get a whole lot more interesting. So the question is, does hot sauce need to be refrigerated? So you're probably thinking, what happens if I leave a bottle of hot sauce sitting on the counter? Or maybe you're thinking, does putting it in the refrigerator actually make the hot sauce safer? Does it make it last longer? Does refrigeration truly change the taste of flavor? What about the fermented sauces? What about fresh sauces? What about fruit-based sauces? What about garlic-heavy sauces? And yes, what about those really thick sauces? And of course, we cannot forget about those bottles that have been sitting in your pantry for, let's just say, a more questionable amount of time. You know who you are. So maybe you've got a refrigerator that looks like a hot sauce museum. Or maybe you have bottles stacked on top of bottles, and maybe you just have an entire cabinet dedicated for hot sauce. And maybe, just maybe, you have a whole bunch of unopened bottles that you've been saving and collecting for a special occasion. Or maybe you're that kind of person that opens up a bottle, sets it there on the kitchen counter, and leaves it until that bottle is empty. And you're thinking, yeah, well, I've never really had a problem with this. Well, that may be completely true. But there is a difference between something probably being okay and something being safe, and something being stored in the best possible way for quality and, say, longevity. And that's what I want to get into today, because refrigeration isn't necessarily about saying, if you don't put this bottle into the refrigerator, that you're going to get sick. That's way too simplistic. For hot sauces, refrigeration is primarily about preserving quality. But other sauces, refrigeration can be an important part of keeping that product overall safe. And understanding the difference, that's where it matters. So today, we're going to be breaking this down by sauce type. We're going to be talking about things like pH, water activity, acidity, sugar, fresh ingredients, fermentation, oil, commercial versus, say, homemade sauces, and we're going to be talking about opened versus unopened bottles. And we're going to talk about what happens inside of that bottle over time. Because a hot sauce bottle isn't just sitting there doing nothing, there are still chemical reactions happening. There can be microbial activity. There can be oxidation happening. There can be changes in the overall color to the sauce, changes in the aroma, changes in texture. And depending on how that sauce was made, the sauce can continue evolving long after you've put the cap on. And by the end of this episode, I want you to be able to look at almost any bottle of hot sauce and ask yourself, does this belong in the pantry? Does this belong in the refrigerator? Or should I probably not be keeping this bottle at all? So go ahead, grab your favorite bottle of hot sauce, open up the fridge, take a look at that collection, and let's settle this once and for all. Does hot sauce need to be refrigerated? Let's get into it. All right, so let's start with the short answer, because I know somebody listening is thinking, Brandon, just go ahead and tell me, fridge or counter? So here it is. Not every hot sauce needs refrigeration for safety. Many commercially produced high-acid hot sauces are formulated to be shelf-stable, especially sauces that are very vinegar-heavy. properly acidified, commercially processed, and designed for room temperature storage. But that doesn't mean refrigeration is absolutely useless. In fact, refrigeration can help preserve the flavor, the color, the aroma, and overall quality. And then you have an entirely different category of sauces where refrigeration is absolutely the better choice. So, what determines where the bottle belongs? There are several things. First, you have acidity. Specifically, we're talking here pH. Secondly, we have water activity. Third, you have the amount of sugar and other nutrients available to the microorganisms. Fourth, the ingredients. Are you dealing with vinegar and dried peppers, or are you dealing with fresh mango, garlic, onion, pineapples, herbs, or roasted vegetables? Fifth, how was the sauce processed? Is it fermented? Was it pasteurized? Was it cooked? Is it commercially processed, or was it made in someone's kitchen? Sixth, whether the bottle has been opened, because opening a bottle changes the overall equation here. Once you open it, you have now been introducing oxygen. You're introducing the possibility of contamination from, say, things like the cap, utensils, your hand, food particulates, the environment. And if you're one of those sauce lickers that like to get the side of the bottle, you're also introducing your own saliva and anything that you might have going on in your mouth. And you're exposing the sauce to, say, repeated temperature changes. So when somebody asks, does hot sauce need to be refrigerated? The real answer is, what kind of hot sauce are we even talking about? That's the better question. All right, so let's dive into the science of why does acidity really even matter when we're talking about hot sauce. So that's one of the biggest overall factors here, which is pH. Now, I know some of you may have heard me say pH and immediately thought, all right, Brandon, here comes the chemistry lecture. But don't worry, I'm going to go ahead and make this very simple, or as simple as possible for you, because pH is basically a measurement of how acidic or how alkaline something is. And the scale runs from 0 to 14. Lower numbers are more acidic. Higher numbers are more alkaline. 7 is considered neutral, so something like pure water is around 7, while vinegar is very acidic. Lemon juice is acidic, and many hot sauces are also acidic. And that's an important factor here because many harmful microorganisms have difficulty growing in, say, a sufficiently acidic environment. One particularly important food safety threshold is having a pH of 4.6. Anything below that level, the risk of, say, botulism growing or any kind of other bad toxins are greatly reduced. And that is a very important reason as to why acidification is used in food preservation. But here's where I want to slow down, because this is oftentimes where the internet discussions tend to go wrong. You'll occasionally hear someone say it needs to be below 4.6 in order for it to be safe. And that's not the complete story. pH is incredibly important, but it isn't the only factor. You also have water activity, you have the processing, you have ingredients, packaging, contamination, and you have storage conditions. And of course, you have a specific product formulation. So, lower pH doesn't automatically mean every possible microbial problem is eliminated. And that's why commercial sauce manufacturers don't simply stick a pH meter into a batch and say, cool, we're done here. There's so much more involved in validating a shelf-stable product. So next, let's dive into the water activity. This is another piece of the overall puzzle. And this one gets misunderstood consistently. Water activity isn't simply asking how much water is in this sauce. It's asking how much water is actually available for the microorganisms to use. And that's an important distinction here because two foods can contain a similar amount of water, but that water may not be equally available. Think of things like salt and sugar. Those can really tie up water. Drying can reduce the overall available water. So if you're drying out your ingredients, you're going to be reducing that water. Certain formulations can make it much harder for microorganisms to grow. And that's one of the reasons why food preservation is absolutely fascinating. You can change the environment in multiple ways. You can change it by lowering the pH. You can reduce the water activity. You can control the temperature. You can control the amount of oxygen. How you heat and how the heating process is executed can play effect. What kind of preservatives that you use play into this effect. You can combine several of those strategies, and that's what food safety really is. It's not just using one magical ingredient, it's creating an environment where dangerous microorganisms really cannot thrive. And that brings us back to hot sauce, because when you look on the bottle of sauce, you're looking at a preservation system. The peppers are just one part, the vinegar, another. Then you have salt, then you have sugar, you have the processing. The processing may only play a role. The bottle itself also may play a role, and the storage conditions also matter too. So, what actually happens when you put hot sauce in the refrigerator? The first big thing is the temperature slows things down. Chemical reactions generally happen more slowly at lower temperatures. Microbial growth is also slowed just simply by refrigerating. And that means that your sauce can often maintain its original characteristics longer. Colors stay brighter, the aromas can be preserved longer, the flavor can change, but it happens more slowly. And if you have a sauce that still has some microbial activity, refrigeration can dramatically slow that activity. So now, does refrigeration freeze the sauce in time? No, you're not cryogenically freezing this sauce so that it can come back to save the world whenever the AI takes over. It's not like that. Your sauce is still changing, it's just changing more slowly. And that's an important distinction here. Even inside your refrigerator, oxidation can occur. Pigments can degrade, aromatics can change, textures can even change, and the flavor profile can over time evolve. But refrigeration generally gives you more time before those changes become obvious. Taking a look at the other side, what happens when you leave that sauce on the counter in room temperature? It all simply depends on a few factors. If you got a commercially produced, high acidic, shelf stable, vinegar based sauce, room temperature storage may be completely consistent with the manufacturer's intended storage conditions. And that's why you see some famous bottles just sitting on restaurant tables. They're not necessarily doing this because they're being reckless. The bottle was formulated for that specific environment. But room temperature isn't doing the sauce any favors when it comes to long-term overall quality. Heat accelerates many chemical reactions. The light can degrade the pigments, oxygen can contribute to the oxidation, and repeated exposure to warm temperatures can speed up the changes in flavor and color. So, even if the sauce remains safe, it may not taste the same, say, 6 months later. That's the key point here. Safety and quality are not the same thing. A sauce can be safe, but no longer taste like the sauce the maker intended it to be. So let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper. Let's go ahead and break this down by sauce type, because this is where I think the episode becomes more useful. Let's go ahead and take the major categories of hot sauce. And I'll tell you what I would generally do in each single one of these scenarios. Not as a replacement, say, for the manufacturer's instructions, but just a particular framework. So think Louisiana style sauces, thin sauces, vinegar forward sauces, and a lot of pepper mash, salt, vinegar, maybe a little bit of garlic, but only a few other ingredients. those are generally among the easiest sauces to store. High acidity is doing a lot of the preservation work there. Many commercial versions are specifically formulated to be shelf stable. So, what about unopened hot sauce? Well, usually pantry storage is an appropriate fix here. Just make sure that the manufacturer also says so. What about opened? Many can still remain at the room temperature, but refrigeration, once again, can help preserve the overall quality. So, if you got a bottle of, say, classic vinegar based sauce that you're trying to use every single day, leaving it on the counter isn't automatically a problem. If you're using it slowly and it's going to be sitting there for months, I'd lean towards the refrigeration aspect, especially if you care about preserving the original color and flavor. Now let's go ahead and dive on into, say, fermented sauces, because this is where things also tend to get a little bit interesting. A fermented hot sauce isn't necessarily finished changing just because you have bottled it. If the sauce is still biologically active, microorganisms may continue transforming that product. And that can mean that there's changes in the overall acidity, in the flavor, in the aroma, and potentially the more dangerous aspect here is the gas production of it. So if you've got a live, unpasteurized, fermented sauce kept at room temperature, storage can allow that to ultimately continue happening. And that may be exactly what you want, but it may not. Refrigeration dramatically slows the overall fermentation. That can help preserve the flavor profile that is reached when that you finally decide that it's okay and that this is the sauce that you want and you're going to go ahead and bottle it. And this is especially important for those home sauce makers. If you ferment your peppers, you blend them, you bottle them, and then you leave them sitting at room temperature, don't automatically assume that the fermentation has stopped because it may have continued. And if that gas continues to build and it ends up with the pressure that is trapped on the inside of that bottle, you're in for a wild time because these things can get dangerous. They can explode. Best case scenario, it just breaks the plastic cap and goes all over the place. Worst case scenario, you got glass everywhere, and then you have a whole entire ruined pantry counter wherever you're storing it. So for a live fermented sauce, refrigeration is generally the safer and more predictable storage choice, unless the product has been properly processed and validated for, say, shelf stability. So what about fresh fruit and veggies in sauces? How does that change the overall storage? So let's take a look at, say, you have a mango habanero sauce or a pineapple jalapeno sauce or just a roasted garlic in there. You have some sauce that's loaded with, say, some fresh onions, some fresh herbs, some fresh veggies. Those sauces can be very different from a vinegar-forward commercial sauce. And why is that? Well, because you're introducing more nutrients, more available water, and potentially less acid. And those factors can change the microbial behavior significantly. A sauce can taste acidic and still not have the same preservation characteristics as a commercial, valid, shelf-stable product. So if it's a fresh ingredient sauce, especially homemade, my default is simple. Refrigerate it, please, and use it within a reasonable time frame. Don't just assume that because it contains vinegar or has vinegar in the overall process that it's automatically shelf stable. Another thing that I would like to point out here is if it's an uncooked sauce, I generally try to consume that in under a week. There's no reason for you to keep it past that week. You're only asking for more problems the longer that it is sitting in your fridge. And also, do not leave uncooked sauce for a long duration sitting out on, say, a counter. It will go bad much faster than, say, the 1 week time frame that you might be able to grab out of it just by keeping it in the refrigerator when you're not using it. So now let's talk about thick sauces. And this is where I want to correct something because this gets talked about incorrectly and repeated online often, far too often, really. Thickness by itself doesn't automatically mean that the sauce is unsafe. A thick sauce isn't dangerous simply because it's thick. The actual formulation matters here, but thick sauces can have different physical characteristics, and high sugar sauces have their own considerations to take in. Sugar can reduce water activity at sufficient concentrations. That's one reason why jams and preserves can last longer than you would expect. But sugar doesn't automatically make something shelf stable either. You've got to look at the entire formulation. I know I keep saying that, but this all matters. A lot of times we'll glaze over and just jump straight to, well, it works for this, so it must work for that. So think about it this way. If you've got a sweet chili sauce or a fruit glaze or a thick pepper paste or something similar to that, go ahead, check the manufacturer's storage instructions. For homemade versions, refrigeration is considered the best choice. This next category deserves extra attention. It's oil-based sauces. Think of things like garlic and oil, creamy sauces, and sauces containing ingredients like dairy or eggs. Those should not be treated like ordinary vinegar hot sauces, especially when you're dealing with a low acid ingredient combined with, say, oil. Certain combinations can create environments where dangerous microorganisms can become a concern. Garlic in an oil is an absolute classic example here. So, if you're making something at home with garlic, oil, peppers, herbs, and other low acidic ingredients, don't assume that by adding just a little bit of vinegar somewhere in the recipe that it automatically makes up for the whole entire thing and makes it shelf stable. This is one of those situations where food safety guidance matters more than internet recipes. If it's an oil-based or creamy hot sauce, go ahead and refrigerate it unless you have some kind of valid reason as to why you're not going to. Maybe it's you're simply going to use it that day. And this brings us into one of the biggest differences that I have mentioned throughout this, and that changes up everything that we've talked about this whole entire time. The differences between commercial sauces versus homemade sauces. A commercial product may have undergone formulation testing, things like pH testing, water activity testing, thermoprocessing, preservation evaluation, packaging controls, and shelf life testing. The manufacturer may know exactly what the pH is, exactly what the water activity is, exactly how the product behaves over time. As to where your homemade hot sauce is, maybe you've just blended the peppers with some vinegar and salt and you tasted it and you thought, man, this is some fantastic stuff here. I'm going to go ahead and put it in a bottle. And I'm not saying that to insult anybody or to cut down someone's start. I've made plenty of homemade food and plenty of homemade hot sauce. But there's a huge difference between I have made a delicious sauce and I validated a shelf-stable food product. Those are not the same thing. So if you're making hot sauce at home, a refrigerator is one of your best tools. And if you're making sauce commercially, then understanding pH, water activity, processing controls, sanitation, packaging, and acceptable regulations become incredibly important. So let's talk about something that I know a lot of people in the community are dealing with, and that's collections. Because you're a chili head, and there's a pretty good chance that you have bottles that you aren't actually using. Maybe you've bought a limited release bottle, or maybe you got a bottle from a festival. Maybe you have a sauce from a maker that you truly love. Maybe it has a cool label. Maybe it's signed by the maker. Or maybe you're just waiting for the right occasion, and 6 months later, you're staring at a bottle thinking, should I put this in the fridge? So here's my advice. If it's unopened and commercially shelf-stable, follow the manufacturer's storage recommendations. But even then, keep it somewhere cool and dark. Don't put it next to the stove. Don't put it in direct sunlight. Don't leave it in a hot garage. And definitely don't think it's unopened, so temperature doesn't matter here. Temperature still matters for quality. And once you open that collectible bottle, the clock changes. Oxygen gets in. Contaminations become possible. And now storage becomes even more important than before. So here's a funny way to think about this. Have you ever gone into, say, a restaurant of any kind? You looked at the table and you've seen, say, maybe 3 or 4 bottles of hot sauce sitting there, and you think, uh, those bottles have probably been here longer than I have. And sometimes that's perfectly fine because the sauces were designed for it. But you can't take the restaurant table example and apply it to every sauce. A commercially formulated vinegar sauce sitting on a restaurant table is one thing. A homemade mango garlic fermented sauce sitting next to your stove for 3 months, that is becoming something completely different. It's the same category, sure, it's still hot sauce. It still has the same storage rules. No, absolutely not. Both of those are going to be handled completely different. So I know what you're thinking. Brandon, what about when the sauce starts to change colors? I've heard that this is just absolutely the worst thing ever. We need to throw it away. It's gone. It's done. It's out. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about that in depth. Color. You open up your hot sauce and it's darker than it was, say, 6 months ago. Is it bad? Well, no, not necessarily. Color changes can happen for a variety of reasons. Things like oxidation, light exposure, heat, natural pigment degradation, chemical reactions, and sometimes those changes happen even when the sauce remains safe. That's why color alone isn't a perfectly easy test here. The same goes for separation. Some sauces separate naturally. Some sauces change their overall viscosity, and some develop sedimentation. Those things aren't automatically signs that something is dangerous. But if you see mold, that's a completely different conversation. If you smell something genuinely rotten or putrid, that's also different. If you have unexpected gas production in a sauce that isn't supposed to ferment, that's different. If a bottle is bulging, that's different. And that's where common sense matters. So when should you throw it out? Let's make this really simple. If you see visible mold, throw it out. Don't just scrape the mold off the top and say, well, the rest looks fine, so it's fine. Especially with a wet food like sauce. You can't assume that the visible mold represents the entire problem. If the sauce develops a truly abnormal smell, go ahead, throw it out. If there's unexpected pressure, unexpected fizzing, or the bottle is bulging, do not open it casually over your food. If the texture has changed dramatically in a way that isn't expected, be cautious. And here's the most important rule. If you aren't sure, just throw it out. A bottle of hot sauce isn't worth gambling your health over. All right, so now we've talked about many different ways in evaluating whether something's good, whether something's bad, shelf stable versus not, homemade versus commercial, the different nuances in between. What is the quick guide decision? Well, let's go ahead and make this incredibly easy. You're standing in your kitchen and you have a bottle of hot sauce. What do? Here's my general framework. Commercial / high acidic vinegar-based sauces, well, you're going to go ahead and follow the label. Pantry is often acceptable for these, but refrigeration is great for quality. Fermented and still active, well, refrigeration, unless it's been properly processed and validated for shelf stability. Fresh fruit or vegetable heavy sauces, I would go ahead and refrigerate. Homemade sauce without validated shelf stability testing. Well, you've probably already screamed it at me. It's refrigerate. Creamy or dairy-based, go ahead and refrigerate. Oil-based, especially with garlic or other low acidic ingredients, refrigerate and follow food safety guidelines. Not sure what you're really dealing with there. It's an anomaly to you. Maybe it had no label. Maybe you just got it handed to you. Go ahead and just be safe and refrigerate. And here's my biggest recommendation: make sure you read the label. If the manufacturer says refrigerate after opening, put it in the refrigerator. It's not a suggestion that I would ignore just because someone online says, I've kept mine on the counter for 10 years and I'm perfectly fine. And regardless of whether your sauce lives in the refrigerator or pantry, there are some simple things that you can do. So, how do you store your sauce, say, better? How do you make sure you get the most out of it? And regardless of whether you're storing your sauce and it lives in, say, the refrigerator or the pantry, here are some simple things that you can do that will help overall preserve the sauce and keep it safe. Things like keeping the cap clean. Don't let the sauce build up around that opening, because when you let it build up around the opening, you are asking for things to go bad. Very simple to go ahead and grab a napkin, paper towel, whatever the case. Ring it around the top, get it nice and clean, make sure there's no particulates, put the cap back on, you're good to go. Next, do not dip dirty utensils into the bottle. Do not put food-covered utensils into the sauce. Do not leave the bottle sitting next to a hot stove. Avoid things like direct sunlight. Keep it sealed when you're not using it. And if you're collecting sauces, consider keeping them organized by type. Your everyday vinegar sauces can live in the pantry, if the manufacturer, of course, says that they're shelf stable. Your fresh or fermented sauces can live in the refrigerator. And your special bottles can be stored according to their specific requirements. This sounds simple because ultimately it is. You don't need a laboratory in your kitchen. You just need to understand what you're actually dealing with. Now, I want to speak directly to, say, some of those newer sauce makers, or maybe some of those that have been making it for a minute, because the conversation isn't just simply for the consumers. If you're making hot sauce to sell, please don't just assume that your sauce tastes acidic so it's automatically shelf stable. And don't assume because you've never had a customer complain that the formulation is safe. Please don't assume that because another sauce maker doesn't do something, that you also don't have to do something. Different formulations behave differently. Different pepper varieties contain different amounts of solids. Different fruits have different characteristics, different levels of vinegar, different sugar concentrations, different processing methods. You have different packings. All of these things, they change the equation here. And if you're producing commercially, you know that you're going to be measuring, you're going to be documenting, you're going to be testing and validating these things. And follow those acceptable food safety requirements for where you are selling. Because once you're selling food to other people, you're not just making something delicious, you're also taking responsibility for that product. And that's responsibility I think every sauce maker should be taking seriously. But there's one more myth that I want to go ahead and knock down. And that is just go ahead and put it in the refrigerator. Refrigeration is incredibly useful, but it isn't the magic reset button. It doesn't make an unsafe formulation safe indefinitely. And it doesn't reverse contamination, and it doesn't eliminate toxins that may have already been formed. And it doesn't mean food can stay longer forever. Refrigeration just slows things down. It doesn't stop everything. That's the important distinction here. So don't use the refrigerator as an excuse to ignore food safety fundamentals, especially with those homemade sauces. So what's my personal rule? It's pretty simple. If it's a commercially produced sauce, I follow the label. If the manufacturer says the pantry, then I'm comfortable with the pantry storage. If they say refrigerate, then I refrigerate. If it's homemade, I refrigerate it unless I have valid reason not to. If it's fresh, go ahead and refrigerate. If it's creamy, refrigerate. If it's oil-based with low acidic ingredients, refrigerate and take food safety serious here. If it's a fermented sauce, refrigerate, because I would much rather sacrifice a little refrigerator space than to say sacrifice a bottle of hot sauce, or even much worse, my stomach. And let's be honest, because we chili heads, we already do enough questionable things to our digestive system, and we don't need to add questionable food storage to the list there. So, what's the bigger lesson here? Because I think there actually is one. And it's one that applies to almost everything I talk about on the Swear Word podcast. Don't just memorize the rule, understand why the rule exists. Don't simply say, hot sauce goes in the fridge. Ask why. What is the pH? What is the water activity? What is in the sauce? Was it fermented? Was it pasteurized, homemade, commercially validated? Has it been opened? How has it been stored? Those questions give you much better answers than a simple yes or no. And that's really what I want this podcast to do. I don't want to just tell you what to think. I want to give you enough information to start asking better questions yourself. Because once you understand the reasoning, you can simply apply it to almost anything. So here's what I want you to do after this episode. Go ahead, go into your kitchen, look at your hot sauce collection, pick out 3 bottles. I want you to pick one that lives in your pantry, pick out one that lives in your refrigerator, and if you're being totally honest, go ahead and pick out that one that you've completely forgotten about. Look at those labels, look at the ingredients, and look at the storage instructions. Ask yourself, why am I storing this here? Maybe you've been doing it exactly right, and maybe you've discovered something that you didn't even know. And if you've found something interesting, then go ahead and tell me. Leave me a message, send me a comment. Go ahead, take a picture, post it in the comments on socials. Tell me what you've got sitting in your collection, because I would love to hear what the Swear Nation is doing with their sauces. So, does hot sauce need to be refrigerated? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And sometimes the answer depends entirely on what's inside the bottle. Don't forget to follow the manufacturer's instructions, because the person who formulated that sauce knows the product better than some random comment that's on the internet. And at the end of the day, the goal isn't fear, it's knowledge. It's not about throwing every bottle of hot sauce into the refrigerator because someone told you that everything is dangerous. It's about understanding the science well enough to make an informed decision, because good food safety doesn't have to be complicated. And a good hot sauce should be enjoyed, not feared. So I want to hear from you. Are you a refrigerator person? Are you a countertop person? Do you refrigerate everything, or do you have 50 bottles sitting there on your shelf? And if you're a sauce maker, what's your philosophy? What do you tell your customers? I'd love to hear your overall experience. Go ahead, leave a comment wherever you're watching and listening. And if you've enjoyed this episode, go ahead, take a second and like it, subscribe, follow the podcast, and please, if you're on a platform that allows for a rating and review, go ahead and leave a review for the podcast. It helps get in front of others and helps get the podcast discovered by more that are curious about the world of hot. If you're interested in supporting the podcast even further, Swear Citizen membership is available for $4.99 a month. That support helps me continue investing my own time, resources, equipment, research, and production into this podcast. And of course, you can always check out the merch, join the newsletter, recommend a guest, or find everything else connected to the Swear Word over at theswearword.net. As well as sponsorship opportunities are open. So if you're a hot sauce company, a pepper grower, a spicy snack brand, your gardening company, a food science company, a brand that fits the overall audience, I'd love to talk with you. There's an opportunity for some integrated sponsorship, things like ad reads, featured segments, standalone sponsorship content, and web placement, social media integration. So just if you're interested, reach out through social media, head on over to theswearword.net, and let's go ahead and get that conversation started. Go ahead and take a quick shout out for our current sponsors, podvision.io. If you're looking to grow your brand, start your brand, you've hit a bump in the road, you're trying to figure things out, highly recommend checking out podvision.io for all of those needs, as well as webdx.one. Maybe you have an online site, maybe you had a guy at one point and lost contact, maybe you just never got around to building a website. Highly recommend checking out webdx.one. Best of all, they get you looking great while you get to focus on what you're doing best. And to everyone who's been listening, watching, sharing, commenting, supporting, buying merch, becoming a Swear citizen, or just simply hitting play, thank you. Keep asking those questions, keep learning, keep your bottles clean, keep your sauce stored properly, and most importantly, keep bringing the heat. I'm Brandon Swear, and from everything from the world of hot, this has been the Swear Word.